Hello, everyone. I'm sure we've been introduced, but I'm Stephen Overley, host of the Politico Tech podcast. And I'm excited to be here today to dive into a topic I think we've been hearing a little bit about all day. AI tends to come up in every conversation you have these days, but it deserves more airtime. And so that's why I'm excited to have this expert lineup of panelists to help me dig into it. You know, I don't think that there is a global challenge today, that whether it's in government, in business, you name it, that technology is not part of the solution, part of the problem, or some combination of the two. And so a lot of opportunity, I think, and a lot of concern for us to explore here today, talking about AI and emerging technologies. Martin, I'm going to come to you first. You know, the tone of today's summit, I think, has been very friendly, you know, casual conversation among neighbors. When it comes to AI, though, there is competition happening. You know, the US has for a long time been a leader in tech. You now have countries, including Canada, investing very heavily to get their own piece of this tech revolution. From where you sit as the CEO of Cohere, I understand you have headquarters in both Toronto and San Francisco. What does that competitive landscape look like to you?
Well, first of all, it's a very, very exciting time. I think when we look at what the opportunities are with AI, and certainly what burst on the scene with ChatGPT, 18 months ago, this is, in my mind, the biggest disruption and transformation in how humans and computers interact, and how we as humans inform, communicate, entertain ourselves in 30 years, since the Mosaic browser came out in 1993. And that changed everything at that time, and not immediately. The paradigm we've heard of we always overestimate the short-term impact of new technology and greatly underestimate the long-term impact. And we saw that with digital, perhaps with mobile phones, and it's the same thing here. And competition is good because competition spurs innovation. I would posit that the US is an incredible place for tech. I spent many, many years there myself. Many Canadians have left Canada to go and work there and had amazing success. But with AI, a lot of the birth of modern AI has come out of Canada. And one of the things that we as Cohere wanted to do is have a company set up here where a lot of the talent comes from, and have an opportunity to commercialize that talent, those capabilities, as a global company that is very present here, but that also, as you said, has strong presence in San Francisco, in New York, and in London, where the talent is. And so competition, I think, is fantastic. It's just important, as with any technology, that you think about what it is that you're trying to do and not try and just be a me too. We, as a company, we have no consumer chatbot. We are enterprise only. We are very focused on data privacy, data security. We're independent, so we work on every single cloud as well as on-prem, which is important for many companies much of the time, but not all companies all the time. And there are many other things that other companies like those up here on the stage and others are doing complementarily to serve the markets that they've chosen. But I think certainly between Canada and the US, there shouldn't be competition. It's not like we're Canadian competing with the US. We're also American. I'm actually American now with my red, white, and blue socks, despite having been born and grown up and educated in Canada. So I think the more we can make this seamless transition or interaction across the borders, whether that's using compute in the right place, whether that's harmonizing our copyright laws or the policies around liability, whether it's making flow of labor in both directions more easy, whether it's being each other's customers. How can the various governments be each other's customers of this technology? I think there's a lot that we can do together to build the ecosystem overall and allow companies to compete on their merits and choosing the areas they want to focus on.
I was listening recently to a New York Times tech podcast, so a competitor, but I will shout them out, called Hard Fork. And Prime Minister Justin Trudeau was the guest, and he was asked about brain drain, essentially, the loss of AI talent from Canada to the US. And his counter argument was that he sees Canada as having more favorable immigration laws and a higher quality of life. Jordan, you talk to a lot of entrepreneurs building companies. Do you see a competitive advantage for Canada over the US or vice versa?
We invest in both places, and so I think we see it up close. And as someone who was involved in creating the Vector Institute in 2016, 2017, the purpose of creating Vector and the Pan-Canadian AI strategy, which funded Mila, Joshua Bengio's lab, and Amy Rich Sutton's lab, in addition to Vector, was to produce a lot of talent and to have a place that the talent could go work. The reason we did that was I was running an AI company before we sold it to focus on building an institutional investor. We had this challenge of we would go recruit people from Mountain View or from DeepMind in London, and they would say, look, I'm prepared to quit my job, and so is my spouse, and we're going to pull the kids from school and pay the exit tax and move to Canada. But if it doesn't work out with you, there's no other jobs in AI. I'm talking about 2015, 16, 17. So you need a critical mass of talent in order to attract more talent, in order to attract the companies that then create the ecosystem of jobs that the next person knows if they go there and it doesn't work out with the first place, there's 50 or 100 or 1,000 other opportunities. So I think that at a baseline, you need the talent pool to attract other talent. And what really smart people in this field want is to work with other really smart people. So I think that's more important than what the weather is, what my taxes are, any of the other, how close cottage country is. It's much more about, I want to be with the smartest people in the world doing the most ambitious things. And so if you can create the ecosystem that can support that, everything else follows. It certainly helps to have startup visas that you can hire someone in 2 weeks when you're comparing to an H-1B that takes a lot longer. Like there's other things you can do in the kind of periphery, but the core of it is talent and making sure that you have an ecosystem that facilitates that.
And Christina, I'll come to you because IBM, clearly a global footprint. You pay attention to how sort of many countries around the world are approaching AI, both from a regulatory perspective, from investing resources. How much alignment do you see between Canada and the US?
So I think globally, so as you mentioned, we're obviously a global company. We have operations in 170 countries around the world. So for us, having interoperable, not the same regulation, but interoperability around regulation is really important. And I do think that there is a lot in terms of interoperability and more to come in terms of the harmonization of laws between Canada and the US. And I also am encouraged by the creation or the announcement of the creation of the Canadian Safety Institute. The US has one, Canada has one, other countries are developing those, because even if the regulatory approach is different, the law is different. For me, now I'm speaking on policy, but I'm also responsible for our compliance program across the company. And so for me, the way we think about it is we need to distill, if we look across all of these global laws and regulations, and we distill them down to what are the commonalities among all of them. They're all fairly common when you think about things like risk management systems and quality data and transparency elements and that type of thing. And where things are going to play out in the future are around the standards. Like, okay, we talk about transparency. What do we mean by that in reality? What will suffice? What documentation will suffice, for example? So I think there's a lot of work that's left to be done. And then I would also say, we want to ensure that regulation is focused on, that it's risk-based, that it's focused on the use of the technology and not the technology itself. And so I think as we see that play out, as we settle on what are the common areas that we consider high risk amongst our countries, like-minded democracies, that's another real opportunity for us to have alignment.
I wonder, as a quick follow-up to that, we've seen that in tech before, where there's broad strokes agreement on principles, and then things break down in the details. Is AI different?
I hope not. I actually think AI may turn out to be a poster child for how to do it right.
Okay.
I'm hoping and encouraged because, and others may disagree, but I hear a lot of conversation around countries and around the safety institutes and standards bodies all trying to figure out together, how do we do this, right? How do we build trust in the technology, leverage the potential of the technology in ways that are consistent with that trust, and support the real potential for innovation, that AI for innovation, for productivity improvements, for improving quality of life for people, right? But we have to do it with technology that's trusted. And so conversations are happening in the AI space like I've never seen happen in a coordinated way across any other topic that I can think of in the past.
You know, Anna, as we're sort of pursuing this AI future, I think of obstacles to overcome. And two that come to mind for me immediately are increased demands on energy and increased demands for microchips, right? You know, everyone wants NVIDIA microchips or the highest power microchips to make AI work. And perhaps not coincidentally, those are two areas the US and Canada have pledged to work together. What would you like to see them do?
So yeah, this is, I think now we're really realizing that it's not the software itself, or certainly we can no longer just think about the models that we're building. Because to really take advantage of this technology, you need not just the chips, the land, the energy, the interconnection, all of these things. And this is where, when I'm speaking to policymakers in the developing world, they are terrified that because the access to this is so incredibly limited, that basically the US and Canada, maybe a few countries in Europe, will be able to really leverage this technology to the extent they want, and then everyone else will be left behind. And I do think this is actually one of my biggest fears for the technology, and I think the US and Canada really can help in this space, that they can really think about what it means to have more equitable access to this technology, but thinking about the actual hardware that is necessary to leverage this technology. You actually see that China is already doing this. They are building AI infrastructure around the world. Obviously, I think we would want democratic countries to lead in providing this infrastructure, because that also is a part of ensuring that there's a certain set of values that accompanies the way that this technology gets disseminated.
Got it, got it. You know, one thing that I think a lot about with AI is public adoption and public trust of the technology. You know, obviously the panel today is AI enthusiasts and folks who have made it their business. And I'm fortunate to talk to other folks who have concerns about it, you know, whether that's artists and musicians worried about the copyright of their product, whether that's even regular people worried about deceptive content that they encounter. I think we've all probably questioned that and how much we can believe things are true. Martin, as someone building an AI company right now, how critical is public sentiment to the adoption of AI, and where do you think it stands right now?
It's obviously very critical. I don't think it's anything new. So if you think about the steam engine, the printing press, the internet, every time there's a massive disruption, transformation in technology, everyone is fearful. I'm going to lose my job as a farmer tilling the fields, or I'm going to not be a scribe with my quill pen or whatever it is. And every single time, it's true that some things have changed, but overall, it's been enormously growthful for jobs, enormously growthful for economic value, enormously growthful for quality of life. Because generally, some people have said, if you think about use cases, think about the things you hate the most about your job, and how can we remove those so that you focus on the things that really matter. Similar to when the word processor came out. Maybe there were less people in the typing pool, but those people quickly would do other things, become bookkeepers or become journalists, or spend more time on higher order thoughts. In terms of developing trust, I think it's very important. And one of the things that I would say, I think we have many policymakers and government officials here, become customers. The way you're going to have trust is, it is very important to have the right guardrails. So I don't want to downplay that at all. But it would be great if we also talk about all the great advancements this technology can bring, in addition to going straight to safety institutes and risks and so on. Yes, we need to think about those carefully. But I would think the best way to figure out how to do things safely is start to deploy it. in production at scale in low-risk ways. For example, how do you get better information on filling out your taxes from the IRS or CRA? How can you get information about renewing your driver's license at the DMV so you don't waste 3 hours because you brought the wrong stuff? None of that's going to change the world, but it does do a couple of things. One, it forces companies like ours, but also the deployers themselves, to go through all the yucky stuff that no one writes articles about. How much compute do you need? What's the latency? What are the data access rights that you have to set up, and all these things to make it work behind the scenes. And secondly, it builds trust. If the citizenry is now delighted saying, I know how to get a visa from the US consulate, I just got that information so much easier, this just saved me an hour, then they start thinking about all the other things that it can do. So I think that the single best thing that governments can do is become customers, deploy this stuff, and show that it's actually positive, and develop the trust that this is actually a really helpful technology. The next thing I'll say, I'm actually going to come back a little bit to what Anna was saying. I agree that there's an issue with cost. I'm painfully aware of that in terms of the compute and so on, and the fact that the southern world is going to have a bit more of an issue of accessing. I do believe that history repeats itself, and I think it's similar to broadband and mobile, where competition will be good and it will drive down these unit prices. Yes, NVIDIA is fantastic, AMD is doing some cool stuff, IBM's, Intel, Grok. I mean, there's a lot of innovation that will happen that will push down the cost of serving, of inference. The same way that early business cases for mobile phones had a very small portion of us spending thousands of dollars a month, because you're talking when you're walking around the street. And what actually happened was everyone was spending less, but overall the consumption went through the roof. I think we'll see something similar as the unit costs come down, that enables ubiquitous consumption of this, just like today with internet, with mobile that we're just using all the time, and also makes it more accessible to the developing world, where they kind of skipped over fixed internet and went straight to mobile because the developed world had pushed down those prices so much. That may take a little bit of time, but if you already look at what's happening with competition to drive down prices, because there is so much potential, I think that's quite exciting. So I think I think government can really help to get the flywheel going by becoming customers, deploying it.
Christina, for folks who are trying to deploy AI, bring it into their company, bring it into their doctor's office, their government agency, I mean, how do they overcome some of those doubts and skeptics, folks who worry whether it's AI is going to take their job, or this technology hallucinates, it's imperfect? How do you overcome those trust concerns?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's probably the most important thing, right? To have trust and to have as much understanding about how the technology works among your workforce and what the implications are going to be for the workforce and for their jobs, right? So that's why we've kind of led at IBM internally, right, with governance, right? Governance first. And our platform for clients is very much focused on a studio to build AI, a data lake to get data to train it, and then importantly, a piece that I spend a lot of my time on, a governance component. So that as you are building and training AI, you can govern it, which means implement workflows that will help you to produce a document showing the data that was used to train it, making sure that the data going in is vetted and trained, managing it over the life cycle. I also chair our AI ethics board. So we give a lot of thought before we are involved in AI solutions, either internally or with clients and the like. Does it comport with our principles for trustworthy AI? Does it augment humans and not replace them? Is it transparent and explainable? Those types of things. So building all of that into your processes and making decisions up front that are strategic in terms of how you're going to use it, that are consistent with your principles and that type of thing, and being transparent with employees and the like. I think that's really critical to build trust in the tech. The other thing I will say, and this goes back a little bit to Martin's point about governments, right, being users, companies too, like the way we use AI internally in a number of our Like we have something called Ask HR and Ask IBM, right? These sort of, where we're using our own internal information to make it easier to get access to information across a complex business. And when we're building those tools, we are very clear with IBMers that you're all in this with us. Like this isn't going to be perfect, and maybe you shouldn't trust the answer right away, but if you play with it, the more you play with it, and the more you tell us back and forth that this is a wrong answer, this is how I would do it differently, like they're learning how to use AI, and we're learning how to make it better so that over time there are fewer errors, and we know where we can deploy it safely within the company. So I think this whole process is one where we have to be in it together, and we have to be really transparent about where we're using it and what its flaws are and what it's really good at as well.
Anna, for OpenAI building obviously very public-facing AI platforms, I want to ask where the company is on privacy, including just yesterday made big news, obviously, that OpenAI is partnering with Apple. We could soon see ChatGPT on all of our iPhones and other devices. That does raise questions for people about how their information is used. Is it being fed into AI models, and how is that information being protected? Can you talk a bit about OpenAI's approach to data protection and sort of how you respond to skeptics who have concerns about that?
Sure. So first of all, on any application that's used by an enterprise or any of the work tools like Teams, the ChatGPT for Business Enterprise, none of that data is ever trained on. And you're also able to just essentially choose to not have any data trained on if you are using you can basically opt out or turn off memory. So it's it's a very simple step. So this is something that we take very seriously. And, we have a pretty good track record. If you look at our deployment of this tool to hundreds of millions of people, you really haven't seen there be, massive violations of privacy or, massive, safety issues or concerns that have come up, which I think is a pretty great indicator of how seriously we've taken this work.
And is there, lessons learned, you think, from, I hear this comparison often sort of with social media and sort of with the way that social media has played out, where everyone loved it until suddenly they kind of realized there were all these issues with it, and then they didn't love it anymore. And with AI, we're in a unique position where we're sort of looking at the upsides and the potential downsides from the start in many ways. How has that informed the way that you all approach development of AI and thinking through some of these sort of questions about rules and parameters that you put on it?
Well, I think that the good news is that we've learned an enormous number of lessons from exactly the cycle that you're talking about. So this is something that we have built in from the outset. We were thinking about these safety concerns from the beginning of model development through its deployment, and then there's an iterative process constantly to improve the models and make them safer. And you've seen each successive model become safer and safer. And research that's really, for example, we pioneered a technique called reinforcement learning from human feedback. One really big distinction between, let's say, GPT-3 and 4 is GPT-4 can refuse to engage in behavior, but GPT-3 was not able to do that. So we're constantly pioneering new techniques to make these models safer. In general, when we have GPT-4, for example, we spent 8 months red teaming it, bringing in people to really think about what are the ways that people can abuse it. And that is, long before we deployed it into the world. And you have seen us actually not deploy things at all to the public. For example, Voice Engine, which is a state-of-the-art audio method where with 15 seconds of someone's voice, we can instantaneously replicate their voice and say whatever that person will, use that person's voice to essentially say anything in any language. And we developed this technology maybe a year and a half ago. which is like 1 million years in AI time.
Yeah.
And we didn't deploy it, even though there are very vast commercial applications. We've used it with some trusted partners, actually some really amazing cases like helping people restore voice who have lost it for some really serious chronic diseases, et cetera. But it's not publicly deployed because we think there's still a long ways to go to make sure that it's actually safe to deploy to the public. Same with Sora, which is the video generation model, which we previewed just so that people understand this is where the state of the art is, but we have not publicly released it. So we are definitely making these decisions very deliberately.
When I was preparing for our discussion today, I was thinking about a conversation I had previously with another Canadian, Yoshua Bengio, who's considered one of the godfathers of AI, who helped advance this technology and now does a lot of work on the safety of it. And Jordan, I'm curious to come to you here because investors often think about the value created by a new venture, right? Not necessarily the value that is disrupted or destroyed. And to be fair, that is how progress works. With the concerns, though, around artificial intelligence and these doomsday scenarios that we hear about of war and inequality, is there a different calculus for investing in or developing AI?
I think it depends who you ask. I think for us, there is. So we're looking at it, we're trying to, what excites us is investing in things that can change the world for the good. So the literal phrase that my partner and I used when we decided to sell our AI company and focus on being an investor it was shortly after the Transformer paper came out in 2017. We felt like we had been using deep learning for prediction and personalization, and it was really effective. We thought this is the next iteration of neural nets, and what we felt was this was going to do things like cure cancer. And so our motivation was, let's go support the kinds of companies that are doing things to cure cancer and build language models and change the world for the good. It depends on the individual investor. Our view was, if we pick problems that are big enough that we think this technology can help solve, you do good and you also make a ton of money for your investors. Our performance is proving that to our investors. And then the way that you make those decisions, I think, can be influenced by the way that you're thinking. So, for example, in all of our term sheets, we've always put in an obligation for the companies to think about responsible AI. Initially, the law firms that represent most of the tech companies would cross it out. We've never seen this before. What is this? What are you doing? We use internally a framework when we're evaluating AI companies. Where's the data coming from? Is the data broad enough to not create a bias in the data that's going to actually result in bad outcomes that the customers won't like? And so we think of that as a risk. It's a risk as an investor, right? And part of what we're trying to do is always quantify risks. So we created a framework that essentially elucidated a huge number of things to think about as an investor. We open sourced it. Hilariously, a bunch of firms jumped all over us and said, you're terrible and you want to slow things down. That's not all what we want to do. We just want people to have the benefit of, we were the first Western investors in AI, and we wanted people to be thinking about, here are all the different things that you should consider, and you can score them however you want, but here's how we score them, and here's how we think about the elements of them and the risk that they create. So I think it's down to the individual investors. Some will just invest in things that they think will make the most money. Some will invest in things that they also think has a benefit to the world. There's people in between. So I don't think there's like with the rest of the world, there's not a uniform approach to it, but I think there are a lot of people being responsible in the way they're thinking about it, in their engagement with the companies that they're investing in, and then also engagement with the wider ecosystem of industry, of government, et cetera, and trying to lead the organizations that are learning in the right direction.
Martin, I'm curious from your perspective on this question, the AI that you see, whether it's what you're developing at Cohere or what you just see from competitors or partners, does it align with the sort of fear, doomsday, end of days kind of talk that we sometimes hear about artificial intelligence?
Not at all. This is in many ways, it's already being used in production. Our AI capabilities are built into every product that Oracle puts out, whether that's their Fusion apps, ERP or CRM, HCM, human capital management, et cetera, their NetSuite portfolio of apps. And these are products that are already used by tens of thousands of enterprises. They're being rolled out, carefully to understand the usage patterns and the requirements. Like I said, the yucky stuff. But we have, I think, over 250 AI-powered features built into their suite. And so that was a real focus of our company last year because we wanted to ensure that everything we do is enterprise grade. Not just that we do enterprise, but enterprise grade, meaning if Larry Ellison and Safra are going to be okay with this going out to all your enterprise customers, it needs to be very, very buttoned up in everything we do. And there are a bunch of elements of that. Jordan mentioned data provenance, and it's very important to really know where the data is, that the data that this was trained on is not copyrighted data. We offer copyright assurance, as do some other proprietary model providers. Open source does not. In fact, they make you indemnify them if you use their models. That doesn't work for big enterprises. It might work for small developers. You have to make sure that, that if there's an issue with bias or toxicity, that you can take data sources out, and we've got a whole team that just focuses on that on an ongoing basis, which you can do as a proprietary model provider. And the use cases that I mentioned, they're kind of boring, but they're actually really helpful. Like, in HCM, you can auto-generate job descriptions. It's just built into the current workflow. So it's because we only do enterprise, we are enabling our enterprise customers to make great products or improve their current products with these AI capabilities, much like I think on the consumer side, ChatGPT and others enable consumers to do really exciting things. But so it's just improving the capabilities you already have. Like, for example, I don't know if anyone here has funded a spell check startup lately, or an autocomplete startup. It's just built into every piece of software that we use. And I think we'll see more and more of that happening, where it will just slowly, but, sorry, not slowly, it will rapidly and in a seamless way improve the way we already do things. Because you're gonna have incredible enterprises, IBM, Oracle, Salesforce, all these companies who already have their applications built into every company in the world, and they want to improve them and make them be even better at providing productivity. And so that's very different from this, it's going to take the nuclear codes or whatever it is. Guardrails that we care about and policy that we care about and we think is important, things like bias, things like toxicity, things like misinformation, things like when do you need a human in the loop. You're not going to have AI prescribe drugs, but you could have a pharmacist use this to access a huge range of information, retrieve that information, and make a better decision based on having access to better information more quickly. And so we think those are the key things to get right now. We think that's a distraction to talk about this existential risk. And things that maybe we've all got excited about from science fiction novels over the past few decades. The real risks are the things that I mentioned about deploying this. Someone else I recalled earlier had mentioned there already are a lot of institutions that do this. Like you have an FDA. You don't need another AI thing. The FDA needs to, and the Canadian equivalent needs to be equipped to address these risks. People talk about misinformation. My previous job was at YouTube. We've had misinformation for a long time. You've got to figure out what deepfakes are. This is just another version of that you want to make sure that we're always pushing the capabilities to understand when there is misinformation. So these are additional issues to address that we've always been addressing over time. But I think the sort of existential terminators coming over is a bit of a distraction from the key things that we all need to deal about now, and potentially also a push to over-regulate to maybe keep incumbents' advantage because generally heavy regulation will favor the incumbents.
Right. We are almost out of time. I'll come to Christina and then Anna for the final word here, which is, we know now that with technology, it's sort of the technology is neutral and it's all about whose hands it is in ultimately in many ways and the policies that surround it. I'm curious from each of you, what is one thing, whether it's industry or government, can do to ensure that we have AI for good and not AI for bad?
So I think industry and government both have to work together, right now. Now's the time to do that. And start thinking about the ecosystem. What do we want? Where do we as societies want to be deploying this technology? A big concern for us right now is a focus on ensuring that the future of AI is inclusive, right? That it, to sort of Martin's point, that there are many players at the table. So we focus on our enterprise clients being able to be AI creators, and the same is true of governments. We want them to be creators of their own AI. We don't want the future to be one where there's just a handful of players, right? This is an ecosystem that we're creating right now, and the rules that we set now are going to determine what that ecosystem looks like. So I think that's an important focus area for IBM right now.
I do think that governments are, of course, it's very critical that they figure out the guardrails, but Martin said this previously, which is that governments using it, partly because they will create like very good use cases, but also this is really about ensuring equal access, and governments are the biggest distributor of services to people. This technology, ultimately, part of it is it just does a lot of boring things, but it makes you more productive. Moderna, for example, they use it for a lot of boring things, but it means that they can accelerate clinical trials. Their clinical trials are taking them 20% of the amount of time they used to take before they started integrating our models. Every single government agency could do this. And we've seen this already. We have a pilot with this organization called Digital Green that does smallholder farmer support in Kenya and India. They have been able to cut the cost of serving each farmer by 100x per year. So imagine like what that means for service delivery, but also for governments to understand like where are the actual risks, where are the limitations, where are the benefits. They're the ones that are going to regulate and oversee this technology. So the more they use it, the more they understand it, and the more they're able to leverage it for delivering to citizens.
Excellent. Well, thank you all so much for being here. Thank you all for your time today.
Thank you.